We're here with Rabbi Cherie Koller Fox, an ordinee and leader of this institution for a long time. Good morning.
Good morning.
Tell us your story.
Oh, that's too hard a question. Story about what? Me and my personal journey to the rabbinate or something?
Yeah. And what prompted you to attend the academy? What were you doing before you attended the academy?
Okay. So I'm going to show how old I am now. When I was a teenager, I wanted to be a rabbi. And I went into my rabbi's office and I said to him, Rabbi, I have decided I'm going to be a rabbi. At which point he literally fell on the floor and began laughing because women weren't rabbis in those days, and I just didn't never even occurred to me that I had never seen a woman rabbi, but I figured there must be a woman rabbi somewhere. So then I changed, I had to change my career goals, and I thought I'd be a social worker. And it turned out, God leads you to your work, I believe. So I couldn't be a social worker, so I became a Jewish educator. And not because I couldn't become a social worker, but it just led me along that path. So I have to think back such a long time ago. So in my work in Jewish education, I realized some of the difficulties of Jewish education, and I began to think about global solutions, and we came up with this idea of CAGE, put that together in our early 20s. This is me and my friend Jerry Benjamin, and it became very successful. And I decided if I couldn't be a rabbi, I probably should get a doctorate in education. So somewhere in the middle of that, it became possible to become a rabbi, but I had young children, and so I worked in a community in Cambridge, Massachusetts, that I thought I was going to for a year while I was in graduate school, and I ended up being there 25 years. And the community turned into a synagogue, and I decided I'd better turn into a rabbi. And at that point, I started looking for a place to go to school. So because of my connections, I knew all of the rabbinical school presidents in New York and Los Angeles and all those people. So I called all of them. They said, Cherie, we would love to have you here. One of them said, but the thing is, you need colleagues. And I said, colleagues? Aren't you my colleagues? He said, no, you need students who are your colleagues. So I said, well, the thing is that I've been studying for the past 15 years very seriously, and I wondered if I could begin studying where I left off and not go back to the beginning. And they said, no, you'd have to start right at the beginning and go through the whole curriculum. And I said, that just doesn't sound right to me. So I remembered that my friend from Akron, Ohio, where I grew up, Bobby Waxman, Rabbi Robert Waxman, had said he went to some other school in New York. So I called him up, and he said, it's called the Academy. So that's how I found the Academy. And I came here. They were in a synagogue building in New York. I remember I met Shohama, and it was a very small school in those days, just a couple of people. And I started, just in the conversation, I got excited about the academy. And Shohama and I ended up talking about what it could be and how it could be that way. And so I agreed to come here because she agreed to let me start where I was and study whatever I needed to study to complete the requirements of the academy. So that's what I did. And I came every week. I'd go to school on Sunday morning and get on an airplane to New York, which was cheap in those days. And then I had a congregant who had a loft on the Lower East Side, which she let me stay in, and I had a view of the Statue of Liberty, so it was really nice. And came up to the academy and had a wonderful experience studying with my class. Especially remember studying with Rabbi Zlotowitz, who was an amazing teacher, and he was an older man even at that time, and he would sometimes repeat himself. And then I noticed he only repeated himself once, and then he would check off something on the side of his page. So what he was really doing was telling you a story twice. And I thought that was brilliant, so that you would remember it. Oh yes, I heard that story once before, you know. So we had some amazing teachers. We learned, we grew in our skills, and then I went to Israel for a year and studied at the Hartman Institute, and then came back. I didn't get back in time to be ordained with my class, so I was ordained the next year here. One interesting, touching thing to me that happened was that on the day that I would have been ordained, I was in Russia, and it was right after the Soviet Union had fallen, and I went there with Project Kesher, and there were, I think, 400 women from all over the Soviet Union and from all over the world. And I had mentioned to someone, oh, this is the day I would have been ordained. And these women just spontaneously, got up and started singing and dancing with me on that day. And I had 2 ordinations. Yeah.
Spectacular. So, what inspired you to enter an administrative position, and what was that?
I got a call from David Greenstein asking me if I would consider coming to teach at the academy. They had heard that I had left my congregation. I just left my congregation after 25 years there, and I'm having to think. He said, "Well, how about coming to New York and teaching here?" And I said, "Well, how can I do that? That's And then I thought about it. I thought that would be great. I would love to come and teach here. So I came, and after a few weeks, I don't remember all the details, but they asked me if I would also become the admissions director. So I taught and did admissions. And meanwhile, David and I kept talking about, we had the same conversation that Shaham and I had about, what the academy could be and how it could be and how wonderful it could be. And I think David really was looking to do something else in his life. And one day he said, what if I just quit and would you consider being the president of the academy? And I said, what? And, he begged a few times, or begged a few times, and I did. I had a friend here who was quite sick, and I knew that this was a way to be able to spend more time with her in the year before she passed away. So it was it just worked, and my family was great about it. So I drove down every week. I drove back every week to Boston, and I got sick at the end of the year and had to leave. So I had a very brief stay, a year as the president, and a year as the admissions person, and 2 years teaching here. Yeah.
It's quite amazing.
Mm-hmm.
What were some of the challenges that you had to overcome aside from the travel?
Again, this is my impression of the academy in those days, but administratively it was a mess. I spent maybe more than a month just organizing files, just to get a handle on, just trying to make sure that administratively it was in good shape. David is the most wonderful teacher, but Shohammed left. I don't know how Shohammed left things, and he was much more interested in teaching. I'm sure he will tell you that too, than in the administrative part. So I had to pick up those pieces, and then the admissions to the academy gave me a stomach ache every time. Like, how did you know when someone came in and sat down in front of you? How did you know that 5 years from now they were going to be a rabbi? How did you know that? And then they weren't young people. They were people who had lived a life, and we weren't doing any background checks on them. So that upset me. And so we instituted this idea of background checks, like Corey checks, so that we could be certain that, we weren't bringing in someone we shouldn't. And then it became also very clear that people who were coming to the admissions committee were coming because they wanted to learn more about Judaism. And it just struck me that that wasn't a good reason to come to rabbinical school. So we started two things. We started a program of just come and learn before you're admitted, and then we'll see whether this is your path or that is the path. And we also started the Mechina program. And I thought that was important because people were coming, but they weren't prepared really. And that there were some things that we needed to do to prepare people. And also to give a chance for us to get to know them before we formally admitted them to the rabbinical school. In the Protestant denominations, they don't ordain you until you have a job. And I bet that's because of the stomach ache. You just can't, you just can't know. Another challenge I had was cantors. Because I came from the Havurah movement, and cantors were much aligned. No one, believed in cantors. And then suddenly I was the head of a cantorial school, as well as a rabbinical school. And I fell in love with the cantors. And their enormous gifts and all the things that they could bring to worship. And there were a number of things, but we had to get fundraising underway. And again, this is my opinion, but the board in those days didn't have a lot of vision. I had and I still have some ideas about the academy that maybe are not shared by everyone, but I see the future of Judaism as being pluralism. And pluralism is very, very deep in my soul, my heart. And I really think that the academy could be the beacon for that, and that congregations that don't want to be Reform or Orthodox or conservative would be interested in that. And I couldn't sell that idea to the board. And they still haven't moved in that direction to create a movement around pluralism. So that was a challenge for me as well, that they didn't even understand what I was saying. Maybe I'm not a good communicator about those sorts of things. The other thing that came up while I was president was some understanding that not every one of my students knew how to daven. And so we set a requirement that you had to pass a test. You probably remember that, to get out of here, that you could daven, that you knew how to daven all the things that you might need to daven as a rabbi. And that was actually something that one of my professors here was very strong about. So I can't remember everything, but I think those are the main things, that, and of course we didn't have a library, which was a bit of a lack, I would say, in a rabbinical school. So I was very interested in a library. Danny came with this idea that this is how we could do it. I found the bookcases. I'm very proud of these bookcases. And in this beautiful new building, it's great to see a library, and great to see even the remnants of the bookcases attached to the new building. So it's a good thing.
You yourself are a gifted educator, and you've encouraged Jewish learning in a serious way. What was your reaction when you learned that the Academy now offers an MA in Jewish education?
Well, I was thrilled about this MA because, for one thing, I know it's a step toward some scholarships for people who go here, which is really important. And because the Academy needs to grow in important ways, and it needs to see itself not as less than any of the other rabbinical schools. I think we all have this image of JTS or HUC with classes of 50 or 100 students, but actually the Academy is as big as every other rabbinical school out there now, and maybe they graduate a few students less one year or another, but I think that this place is amazing in what it offers, and that the rabbis that we're sending into the world are amazing. Better, I think, than younger people. But I also see a role for bringing younger students into the academy, which really would necessitate a dorm or housing. And we did look into that when I was here to try to do that. But I think the biggest challenge here is accreditation. And I mean, that brings up the whole issue of the California school, which is not the question you just asked. When I was the president here, I went to California, and I walked in the door of the academy on the West Coast, and it is exactly the same school as this one. There is no light between the two. And I have worked diligently over the years, unfortunately it hasn't happened yet, to bring these two schools together, because I believe that that would make the academy a force to be dealt with. So that's like a machloka, a difference of opinion, because the beginnings of that association were difficult. But I could see right away, and I brought the students together at a CAGE conference. Maybe were you there at that meeting? So they fell in love with each other instantly. I mean, there's a great deal of reason to do this, but for whatever reason, that hasn't happened. But I still believe that that's something that should be done. So I'm thrilled about the MA. I think it's a step in the right direction.
So, do you have any fears for the academy as it goes forward?
No, not really. I think once there's accreditation here, and the alumni group is bigger and bigger, then I think that that if it can articulate its theological position, its pluralism, then I think it'll grow and become stronger. It won't be. It has the academy has an interesting history going back to the 50s, and I think that because of that, it's always felt like a second-class citizen. But I don't see anything second-class about it, and I think that that if it can feel good about itself, and I can see, looking around this building, that it is feeling much better about itself, and really insist on its place at the table. If you're going to talk about the rabbinical schools, that this one is on that list. That I think it's going to grow and grow. Just like I always felt that really a rabbinical school did not have to be located in one place. And it's interesting that Aleph has actually taken that model, that what you needed was a teacher and a book and a table, and now a place on the internet and some retreats, and you could become a rabbi in any city in America. And that's a real need. It's a real need in lots of cities, that people should be able to become a rabbi if they live in Akron, Ohio. And I think that that's possible. So I guess my fear for the academy is that it doesn't have the vision that it needs to see itself in this big way. Because I think it has the potential, given the difficulties that the other movements are having, to create a new image of Judaism. And because it's pared down, it doesn't have all that heft with it, that I think it could last in a way that the others who are struggling right now may not be able to last. And this image of cantors and rabbis studying together and becoming ordained is so important and beautiful, and has had a real lasting effect on the American Jewish community in terms of where our people are placed. I think that's important. Yeah.
So if you had a blessing to give to the academy, opposite of a fear, what would your blessing be?
I do a lot of blessing in my work, and I always feel like it comes from through me, not from me. But I think if I would bless the academy, it would be with that it could attract all the people who share its vision. That from all around America, people who feel this pluralistic sensibility would know that it's here and would find it, and that we could create a Jewish world the way it should be, because it's a little over 100 years since we began to separate as Jews in this country, and you can see if you look at the what would you call it, the overview of American Jewry, you have a situation where these movements are collapsing all around us. You have, first of all, they're in financial trouble because synagogues don't see what they're getting from the movements. But second of all, the conservative movement is soon to leave us. Their most loyal echelon and modern Orthodoxy look identical to me at this point, with the rise of women in the Orthodox movement and the rise of observance among this group of conservative Jews. The conservative Jews who don't keep kosher and who don't go to shul very often, they're really much more like Reform Jews, because Reform Jews are moving to the right. They're becoming more observant and God-centered, and social action is a key to their movement, but you're seeing that now among Orthodoxy, and you're seeing it in everywhere. So there's no difference, which is good because we're one people and we don't need denominations. So that's my blessing. My blessing is that we return from being split up into being a spectrum of observance based on whatever rabbi, the Mara Da'atra and whatever community it is. And I think that that's my blessing, that the Academy attracts those people who will then go out. In the same way that Rabbi Weiss has attracted the people to his vision of an Orthodox world with women and with social consciousness. So I think that's my blessing.
Amen.
Amen, that's right. So you asked what was the bonus of rabbinic study? What did I get out of studying to be a rabbi? So Shahama, in the beginning, listened to my idea of it. All it takes to have a rabbinical school is a table and a teacher. And we actually started in Boston. So we put together a table, a great teacher, and 12 students in Boston. And we began to study Talmud. And the year before, I'd taken a Talmud class at Brandeis with Reuven Kimmelman. And I was just talking to my chavruta there, who was the vice chancellor of JTS for a long time. And we were bemoaning this course and how incredibly difficult it was, and how we had to study maybe 12 hours, no exaggeration, for this 1 hour of class. And how grateful we were for this because in the early years of my study, you needed to find a man who knew Talmud, who would help you to learn Talmud. And so I studied at Chavarat Shalom in the early morning hours with amazing teachers. But when I came to study Talmud in the way that we do in rabbinical school, it was very difficult. It was the only thing that I'd only taken sporadically. And Talmud was, for me, an exciting adventure in learning. And when I went to the Hartman Institute, I was in the Beit Midrash, and I studied Gemara for, 7, 8 hours a day. So for me, this was my view of what it would take to be a rabbi, was to master Talmud. Little did I know about codes, which I cannot say I mastered. In fact, when I was in Israel that year, I met a relative that I'd never met before. Her name was Rachel Levmore, and she was studying to be a Toenet, which is a rabbinical court judge, not judge, but a rabbinical court advocate in the first class of those women in Israel. And she's a firm woman, 7 kids, the whole 9 yards. And she was studying Talmud, and I was studying Talmud, and she was studying codes, and I was studying codes. And we were comparing. She said, well, you're doing is to learn to be a rabbi. That's like a BA. She said, what I'm doing is like a PhD, because she was studying codes, almost entirely codes. And then, of course, also Talmud. So that's the difference. We think the main lesson for me of rabbinical school, what I really learned here, is how much I don't know. And that was the most significant learning. I remember being so excited here as a student that I could read Mishnah Torah. I didn't go to a day school. I'd been to Israel. My Hebrew was okay. But to be able to sit and read Mishnah Torah was exciting to me. And then my teacher just offhandedly said, you know, there's 613 commentaries on Mishnah Torah. And I thought, that's it. You know, I'm never going to read 613 commentaries on Mishnah Torah. So I can study my whole life, which I do, and I will never, ever, ever, ever learn all of this. So that was an important lesson, because I think that, you know, not to be immodest, but I think that that's even what Rashi would say if you asked him. You know, I'm never going to be able to know all there is to know, and I have to keep learning and be humble in what I do know. And so that was an extremely important thing. I think the other thing was Shohama taught me the power of blessing. That you know, we talked about it many times, and I remember at one time that we were, I don't remember where we were, but we were sitting on the floor in a hallway talking, and she reached over and blessed me. And at that point, I really felt blessed. And I have to say that every time either I'm in a position to bless or to be blessed, I feel blessed. And I think that also, that spiritual dimension, that it's not just rote praying, and it's not just, but there is something out there which touches us in a deeply spiritual way. So my calling has always been to bring people closer to their Judaism, wherever they're coming from. But most of the people that were in my congregation were Harvard professors and psychiatrists and, you know, very brilliant intellectual people. I had Nobel Prize winners in that congregation when I first came as a young non-rabbi running a synagogue. And I have to say that I think it's important that spiritual dimension and the knowledge dimension are what's important, to be able to bring everyone closer to their Jewish experience. And that's certainly what happens here with all of the students, that they come in, they don't know very much, they haven't seen many synagogues or many rabbis. I always say, you know, people think they've been to a Seder, but actually they've only been to their family Seder and maybe one or two or three others. But most people really don't know what a Seder is. They just know what their Seder is. They don't know what a rabbi is. They just know what their rabbis are. And they don't know what other denominations are like, really. And so I think that's what the Academy is doing, that it's really bringing us closer to our Judaism so that we can bring other people closer to their Judaism. So there's one story about the Academy I think that's important to tell, and that is that it was originally the Jewish Institute of Religion. And this is a story about the Jewish Institute of Religion 20 years before it became the Academy. That there was a famous rabbi in Brooklyn, Rabbi Leventhal, and he had a daughter named Helen. And something happened, and a congregation actually invited her to be the rabbi at their high holiday services. And she said, well, of course she couldn't do that. She was a woman, but she would preach. And they loved her, and so she began after this to study at JIR, the Jewish Institute of Religion, which is, I consider to be our predecessor. So she went through with a group of men. She studied everything, and in the end, at the last minute, they refused to ordain her. And she always felt that this was an injustice. When Sally Presant was being ordained by HEC, she protested that, in fact, she should be recognized uh, as as the first rabbi, and perhaps the other women who had done this should be recognized as well. And Professor Gottschalk was the president at that time. He said he would mention her when talking about Sally, but he would not ordain her. And then when the first rabbi at JTS was about to be ordained, it still bothered her, and she tried to get some recognition again by Gottschalk. So they went looking in their records, and they had no transcript for her. Because I would imagine that the men who were running that institution at the time thought she doesn't need a transcript because she was like an auditor, I think is how they thought of her in those days. So at that point, he refused to do anything to acknowledge her. So I had just read this book called Women Who Would Be Rabbis when I came here as the president. And I said, well, this is an injustice that we could rectify. And so I called her family. I found her family, but it turned out she'd passed away. And there was some debate here about whether it was even possible halakhically to ordain a person who had died. And so it never happened. But I still feel that there should be some recognition of Helen Leventhal Lyons, was her married name, here at the Academy, because she was a student at JIR. This was a grave injustice that was done to her. She went on to become the third president of Hadassah, which was an organization founded by Henrietta Zold, because she also had studied for ordination and early in the century and wasn't granted it. So she founded Hadassah as a way to give women a pulpit, because I think rabbis in those days maybe were mainly preachers and teachers. They didn't have that kind of a role in a synagogue where they said page numbers. I don't even think so. I think that what they did was preach, and preaching was considered very, very important in those days. So I really tried to do this, and I felt really badly that it didn't happen here.